Well, greetings, brethren. Happy Sabbath. Welcome to the Sabbath service for this. One second. The second day of the 6th month. Second day of the 6th month on God's holy sacred calendar. It's the 30th day of July, 2022 on that pagan Roman calendar. Now, we're on a little extra early this morning for a couple of reasons. One, last night our the internet was out here in the local area during live stream time for Bible study, and and because we may lose the internet again. We have some storm-like weather potential outside. I'm actually thankful for the rain outside, cooling things down just a bit. It's been a heat wave, and I've had some symptoms of that heat exhaustion. So I'm on a little early, planning to keep it a little bit short, sing a hymn with you, encourage you to have a good Sabbath. Mention a couple of things from the news that we should be staying on top of, and then trying to do as Christ instructed us in Luke 21:36, to be watching and praying always, so that you may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that are going to happen, beginning with the commencement of the 5th seal, Great Tribulation. Now, I noticed, brethren, a year ago this date, in our archive on cogtv.org, I took a look at some video from last year. And this time a year ago, I had an eye infection with a red eye, such that I had gone out and bought an eye patch to cover the eye. So this year I may have some symptoms from breathing some dust from diatomaceous earth that I spread over the carpets, because of nationwide there's been a pandemic of bed bug type things, and if you got carpeting, that makes it can be especially hard to control that. And so I tried an experiment, and I found out, wow, that's not necessarily the way to do it. Anyway, this morning I want to cover a couple of news items to help fulfill that. By the way, my throat's a little dry because of heat and that possibly some of that dust. But I want to cover a couple of news items that can help us understand how the frustration that could develop in Europe could be coming more and more about. You know, we're seeing frustration in news such that some of the headlines in the news, where the news used to try to be a little bit gentle with certain subjects, going back years ago as I was growing up, and tried to avoid politics. By that, what I mean is they tried to avoid, fisticuff and politics. But in today's news, you see outright name calling, or of one party against another, and it's we've gone in a direction of I guess the best word to choose for it maybe is a certain hatred, and that's sad to see. And one of the things in one of the telecast Mr. Armstrong did is he would talk to people overseas that came up. There's a scripture. I'm going to go ahead and push forward to that scripture. Excuse me. That talks about peace, peace when there is no peace. This is from, let's get that lower third out of the way. This is from Jeremiah chapter 6 and verse 14. They have healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. It gives people a little bit of comfort. Not great comfort, but a little bit of comfort when they say, peace, peace, there's, peace, there's peace. But really, as God explains it here. They're saying this when there is no peace. And as not only is there no peace, but there's also problems that are shown in the news. For example, we'll come back to this one in a moment. Here's a man taking a cold shower, and there's a news story from Germany, Hanover, that I'll cover in just a minute. But I want to put this slide up that shows how Russia, through that pipeline they have, controls oil to the EU. And their cutting of the oil because of Western sanctions is why you're seeing this man taking a cold shower in a public building in Hanover, Germany. Now, going back to this for a moment, I'll come back to that news story, but going back to this pipeline and Russia having a control of being able to cut it off, it's resulted in a major crisis in the German and European industry, and it's a response to Western sanctions that is resulting in Russia cutting supplies of its gas. And again, that's causing a major crisis in the German and European industry. And then going back to the slide here with the man taking the cold shower in Hanover, cold showers and no hot water in public buildings in the German city of Hanover because of the Russian gas crisis. And that kind of frustration, brethren, will and friends, will result in what if history repeats itself, as we've learned from God's end-time apostle Herbert Armstrong, that it will, and just studying history, you see it will repeat itself. There will be more and more frustration to the level that Europe will build, the EU will build its army greater and greater, and eventually there may be something happen between the EU and Russia that winds up in the EU taking the missiles that the president of Russia announced that he had pointed at all the major American strategic military posts and 130 American cities. So then if the EU winds up being able to jump in and take those from Russia at some point because of frustration in building its army and then deciding to blitzkrieg act as Germany tends to do in war. Blitzkrieg meaning lightning bolt type attacks. Then the stages, the provision is gifted to the EU if they come in and take those from Russia. And the Russian president has boldly announced that he's got these. And the United States has done nothing to counter-react that, or nothing significant to cause Russia to want to say, hey, we'll take those down, we'll back those off. No. And in a certain way, they play rough. They play rough, as you know. But we do know that in Bible prophecy, there is no prophecy that says Russia will attack the United States. But the missiles Russia has could go into the hands of the EU quite easily. Well, with a blitzkrieg action on the part of Germany. I want to cover a couple of scriptures that some fellows asked recently. They're asking, a very technical question on some difficult scriptures about, should all men have beards and never shave them? Well, that comes from a scripture in Leviticus. I'll pop it up on the screen. here, and it talks about, let's back up just a little bit in this chapter, Leviticus 21. And the Lord said unto Moses, we're starting in verse 1, speak unto the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, they shall none be defiled for the dead among their people, but for his kin that is near unto him, that is for his mother, and for his father, and for his son, and for his daughter, and for his brother, and his sister, a virgin that is nigh unto him, which hath had no husband, for her may he be defiled. Verse 4, but he shall not defile himself, being a chief man among his people, to profane himself. They shall not make a baldness upon their head. They shall not make baldness upon their head. Neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. Now, these are all things that relate to pagan religion practices. And if you read it carefully about the beard, because some say, you should never cut the beard. Well, if you never cut it, the thing would go down to your feet and look terrible. We always are to trim and groom and look good, but this says neither shall they shave off the corner of their beard. And shaving off the corner was to shape the beard to look like a pagan god. That was a pagan practice that they were doing. And there are scriptures you can go to. For example, 2 Samuel has one that you can turn to, chapter 19, verse 24. And Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king and had neither dressed his feet nor trimmed his beard. The beard has to be trimmed. You have to keep it. God expects good grooming. There's a scripture in the New Testament about men. It's a shame for men to have long hair, so they have to groom this hair, or it grows without stopping and becomes unsightly. That same scripture talks about a woman, it's a crown to her to have long hair. But this scripture from 2 Samuel should help you see that these men, before they came before the king, they hadn't trimmed their beards yet, and nor washed their clothes, things they would be expected to do. Trim the beard. So you can cut it. You can even shave it completely off and be clean shaven. It's going to keep growing. You got to shave it every day. You can either have a trimmed beard or you can have a clean shaven look. You got to understand what the completeness of what God is saying here in these verses. Now, if you go back and watch from our archive a video by Mr. Armstrong on his visit to the Middle East, there's one entitled Quest for Peace. And maybe I'll play that this morning after we sing a hymn. But there will be some scriptures that relate to that Middle East quest for peace that I want to put up on the screen for us for a moment. And noting that a certain religion that is similar in some small respects to God's church, one that the people don't keep Christmas, they don't keep Easter, but they don't keep the holy days, the annual holy days, that is. They have this big thing going on called Pursue Peace. They're expecting millions. Well, they're a big organization. They get all their people to be there, and that's a lot. Now, God's church now scattered. Who could get all of God's people to come together in one promotion of a meeting or whatever it might be, pursuing peace or whatever. But we know from prophecy that the next major event in prophecy is the fifth seal, Great Tribulation. And I think I may have a chart with the seals on it we can put up on the screen here for a moment. And you can see from this chart that the first four active seals let's back up for a moment. There are 7 seals. Only the first 4 of those seals are active. And as God's end-time apostle has explained, the next major event in prophecy is the commencement of the 5th seal, the Great Tribulation. And that is going to be the pouring out of the wrath of man and Satan upon the earth. So before we have peace with Christ returning on that 7th trump of the 7th seal, we're going to have anything but peace. And those who daily watch and pray over the events of prophecy, or daily events that relate to these first 4 active seals depict: false religion, war, famine, and death by either loimus, disease epidemic, seismus, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kind, commotions on the ground, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfires, floods, etc., or terrorcade, just general mobs and sedition. You can escape those if we watch and pray daily as Jesus Christ instructed us to do. And brethren, so that I can return to doing something like I used to do, I would sure appreciate your prayers that God help me clean up some of the things that are causing me to have this problem with my throat this morning. And His mercy endures forever, and we can pray and ask that for others. So I'm asking you to pray that for me, and I sure would appreciate some good help. Let's pause, and I'll go through these scriptures after we sing a hymn. Let's see, I think I'm going the wrong way. We can come back this way where I have a hymn lined up where we can sing. No, that's right. I did need to go that way. We have a hymn we can sing. I loaded right here. Blessed and happy is the man who never walks astray. And I'm going to pull it full screen and let you sing as the Ambassador Chorale sings along with this. As I've often said, thank you for those of you who sang along with us on this one. And Let's go take a look now at some scriptures that relate to a telecast Mr. Armstrong that God provided through his end-time apostle and the people he brought to work with Mr. Armstrong on a quest for peace. And here are some scriptures that would relate. We went over Jeremiah 6:14 at the beginning. They've healed also the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly by saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. And, this is actually out of order, but it answers a question some of the fellows asked me, or a couple of people asked me about, saying that, hey, Jesus, was never violent. Well, it depends on how you define the term violent, but here he certainly showed the ability to come in with a strong hand as he went into the temple of God and found the money changers there buying and selling on the Sabbath. And he cast them all out, all them that sold and bought in the temple, and overthrew their tables. So, wow, he overthrows their tables. And on top of that, he takes a whip. Let's see if this is here. And he said unto them, it is written, my house shall be called the house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. Okay, and there's some parallel scriptures that will show you. Let me leave this one on the screen for just a moment. There are some parallel scriptures that will show you he actually took a whip out against the money changers. And well, let me see. All right, now saying that, I'm punching in whip. Now, I wonder what, it may have been called something else, but if you'll read the scriptures in Mark about the money changers, let's see if that'll bring it up. Here's a little exercise in using your concordance. If we look up money changers, we see Mark 11, verse 15 also. Let me go over here and punch that up. Mark 11, verse 15 also covers the money changers. And here we got that. And then they come to excuse me. That's that dust is getting to me a little bit. They come to Jerusalem, and Jesus went into the temple and began to cast out them that sold and bought in the temples, and overthrew the tables of the money changers and the seats of them that sold doves, and would not suffer that any man should carry any vessel through the temple. My house shall be called of all nations the house of prayer, but you've made it a den of thieves. And it shocked the scribes and Pharisees. Well, I'm actually not finding the scripture, but I think maybe it says it by, he took a cord. Let's try that in our concordance and see if, let's see, I've got to change the lookup so that it doesn't look for every word that has C-O-R-D in it. We'll take out the substring matches. If you bear with me for just a moment, we'll take out the substring matches and see if that brings up. All right, that's not the word. Well, and I accidentally knocked the scripture out off the screen. I'm sorry, brother, but I'm having a little problem breathing in here with this air today, so I'm just going to quickly go through the rest of these scriptures, and next time we're on, I'll see if I can find that scripture where he made a cord and snapped it at these guys and scared them out of the temple, overthrew their tables, the seats of them that sold doves. And I'm going to take one more look real quick here. Typing in money changer again. I must have mistyped it because nothing came up. You know, when you are on the air live and you try to do something, especially in an awkward situation, let's see, cast out all them that bought and sold in the temple. Well, I remember that being taught in our classes at Ambassador College, and they took a whip. So there's got to be a scripture on that somewhere to back that up. But he did overthrow. These scriptures I put on the screen do tell you at least he did overthrow the tables. So, I mean, that takes a certain boldness. Walk up to these guys' tables and overthrow them one at a time, and there's more of them than there are of you. You know, so Christ showed some real strength of character there and some manliness. And you know, overthrowing those, even just overthrowing those tables. Now, he didn't hurt the men, and even when we were taught that he snapped the whip, he didn't actually hit them. He was very, we were told he was very accurate with that and could, you know, hit that whip enough to scare them. But I'm not finding that in the scripture this morning. Maybe some of you know where it is. You can put it in the comments. If you do, that'd be fine. And either on Facebook or YouTube. Now, if you're watching on our own homepage on cogtv.org, we don't presently have a comment section there. Maybe we will in the future. If God helps me survive this and we go on. And again, brethren, I will most definitely appreciate your prayers. All right, if you look at last year when I had the patch on, I held up a glass of water, challenged those who were claiming to be the two witnesses to show the powers mentioned in Revelation 11, starting in about verse 4 or 5, especially the one that says they have power to change water into blood. Excuse me, brother. Let me see if I can make it through the rest of these scriptures that relate to, that relate to Mr. Armstrong's Middle East quest for peace. I'm just going to show them on the screen. And then I'm just going to show them on the screen for a moment. And I'm very sorry about the my voice going out on me, brethren. But if and what I'm going to encourage you to do, go into our archive video section of cogtv.org, and you'll find, scroll down through the list of programs we played, and you'll find one where we have already played Middle East Quest for Peace. It's in our video archive. I'm going to wish you a good rest of the Sabbath. Appreciate the prayers for me, and I'm going to sign us off with a wish for a Shabbat Shalom. Brethren, for those of you who want to stick around for it, I'm actually going to go ahead and punch that up from our media player, and if it makes it all the way through it, okay. Here is God's end-time apostle with Middle East Quest for Peace. Well, having said that, it looks like that's not going to play. Unless unless it's right here. Let's see.
The following is a special presentation of The World Tomorrow with Herbert W Armstrong.
We can say now that we shall have no wars again. We shall sit together round the table to negotiate and settle.
No more wars, peace, real peace, and forever. It is in this human spirit that I say to you with all my heart, Shalom.
The Middle East, a land of centuries-old conflict, but also the land in which President Sadat of Egypt and Prime Minister Begin of Israel have recently together lit the torch of peace. Will the rest of the Mideast see the light as well? Or will the flame be summarily snuffed out and this area become the very land that finally plunges mankind into World War III? Mideast, the quest for peace. The Middle East, long a land of great importance as the home of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, has today attained even more crucial significance with the current world energy crisis. One man who has become well acquainted with the problems in this part of the world is Herbert W Armstrong. His first-hand knowledge of this area has kept him ahead of events there for over 30 years. A familiar face in the Mideast, he's had personal meetings with President Suleiman Frangi of Lebanon, Prime Minister Hedi Nouira of Tunisia, King Hussein of Jordan, Prime Ministers Golda Meir, Yitzhak Rabin, and Menachem Begin of Israel, and President Anwar Sadat of Egypt. With all, Mr. Armstrong discusses the cause of war and the only sure way to peace. In order to better comprehend the current situation, we need to understand the events that have created the centuries-old Jew-Arab conflict and current OPEC problems. Why has there been such long-standing animosity between Arabs and Jews? Believe it or not, the whole thing started in a family squabble about 4,000 years ago. A common ancestry for both the Arab and Jewish peoples? Yes, surprisingly, both trace their roots to one father, Abraham of the Bible, but to different mothers. Abraham's wife Sarah, being childless, offered her handmaid Hagar to provide him an heir. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael, the progenitor of the Arab peoples. However, Sarah finally did have a son, Isaac, and the Jewish people looked to him as their father. Herein lies the beginning of the centuries-old struggle between Arabs and Jews, two half-brothers fighting over an inheritance. After the Exodus from Egypt, the people of Israel of Old Testament times, as descendants of Isaac, inherited and possessed the Promised Land. Under the successive reigns of David and Solomon, the area flourished in the hands of Isaac's descendants. But after the death of Solomon, Israel split into the northern and southern kingdoms of Israel and Judah, respectively. Both were eventually conquered and taken away into captivity. Succeeding world-ruling empires, Babylonian, Persian, Greco-Macedonian, and Roman, each in its turn conquered the area. Under the Persian reign, a contingency of Jews returned to Jerusalem to once again possess the Promised Land. It was the Roman Emperor Hadrian who was to hang the label Palestine on the area now occupied by modern-day Israel. In 70 A.D., the Romans destroyed the temple, and once again the Jews were expelled from Palestine. The Arabs conquered the area in 640 A.D. Passing it down as an inheritance from generation to generation, the descendants of Ishmael, the other half-brother, possessed the promised land. But then Zionism, the ideology that the Jewish people should have their homeland in Palestine, arose as a strong force in the early 20th century. With Jewish immigration from Europe beginning around 1870, Zionism played a major role in the development and formation of what is now the nation of Israel. Upon acquiring Palestine and Transjordan as mandates in 1920, the British designated Palestine for the establishment of a Jewish state. Then, in 1947, the United Nations General Assembly voted to abolish the 1920 British mandate and partition Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. Despite Arab rejection of the plan, on May 14, 1948, the British withdrew their forces, and the new state of Israel was then proclaimed. With this background, we can understand why the very next day, troops from 7 Arab states invaded Palestine in an effort to reclaim what had been their homeland for almost 2,000 years. The ensuing war between Arab League nations and the fledgling State of Israel lasts for over a year and a half. Finally, on January 7, 1949, the Jewish War of Independence ends by UN mediation. The war increases Israel's holdings by almost half. Most of the territory designated for a new Arab state is annexed by Egypt and Jordan, and over 500,000 displaced Arabs are confined to the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. But the tension remains, and with the continual animosity exists the ever-present threat that war will break out again. And it does. On July 26, 1956, under the leadership of Gamal Abdel Nasser, Egypt nationalizes the Suez Canal. An agreement with the Soviet Union has already provided Egypt with large quantities of arms. On October 26th, operating under a secret agreement with both England and France, Israel seizes the Sinai Peninsula, and Franco-British troops take over the Suez Canal, ostensibly to protect it. Pressured by the United States and the Soviet Union, Britain and France withdraw, but it is almost a year later before Israel pulls out. Following the Israeli withdrawal, a UN peacekeeping force is installed to guard the Egypt-Israeli border. But this is yet another short-lived peace. In 1967, Egypt persuades the UN to withdraw its force from the Sinai, after which it immediately blockades the Gulf of Aqaba, shutting off a key Israeli shipping route. Then Egypt deploys troops on the Israeli border. But this time, Israel strikes first. In what came to be known as the Six-Day War, Israel seizes the Sinai Peninsula, Syria's Golan Heights, and all of the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. The victory is swift and decisive, and although the UN Security Council asks Israel to withdraw its troops from the occupied territory, Israel refuses. Yom Kippur, a Jewish holy day, a day of fasting, a day of prayer. And suddenly, a day of war. On October 6, 1973, Egypt, in conjunction with Syria, invades Israeli-held territories. Egypt crosses the Suez Canal and pours into the Sinai Peninsula, while Syria attacks the Golan Heights. But initial success by Egypt and Syria is met by an overwhelming retaliation by Israel. The counterattack carries Israeli troops to within 20 miles of Damascus and over the Suez Canal, deep inside the Egyptian border. A ceasefire is finally negotiated on November the 11th by U.S. Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. This war, the fourth since the establishment of Israel as a nation, was again one of heavy casualties on both sides, both militarily and economically. Only this time, the economic repercussions reached out to the rest of the world. Within the Arab League, the OPEC nations retaliated and announced a temporary oil embargo for nations supporting Israel. For the United States, Western Europe, and Japan, oil prices soared upward to unprecedented new highs as shortages appeared. In the last 30 years, we've seen a quickening tempo of animosity in this part of the world. This acceleration of aggression is even more disturbing when viewed in light of man's new means of mass destruction. Today, with the current nuclear proliferation, only the ostrich-like would say mankind's survival is not threatened. Does Israel have the bomb? What about the PLO? While many speculate that Israel already has nuclear weapons, most agree that supporters of the PLO would willingly provide the financial and technological support for them to attain nuclear capability. Such possibilities become even more frightening in this environment of ever-escalating tensions. The world may well have viewed with alarm the election in May of 1977 of former Israeli guerrilla leader Menachem Begin to the post of prime minister. A devout Orthodox Jew, he displays a clear sense of his nation's purpose and identity. But those immediate fears proved to be unfounded, as 1977 provided a ray of hope for peace. For it is to this government that Egyptian President Anwar Sadat not only makes an unprecedented peace overture, but also is the first Arab head of state to visit modern-day Israel. On that historical moment, recorded by newsmen around the world, Sadat risks not only his political future, but quite possibly his very life. The rest of the Arab world is thrown into uncontrollable frenzy as reaction to this unheard-of move ranges from mutual silence to labeling the visit as treason. After this initial move, Egypt and Israel commence follow-up talks in mid-December. This culminates in Menachem Begin's visit to Egypt, another historic but equally risky venture. Witnessing the Sadat-Begin approach on the pathway to peace, Herbert W Armstrong recognized the importance of their efforts. No stranger to the Mideast, Mr. Armstrong has, through Ambassador College and the Ambassador International Cultural Foundation, supported numerous programs in the area, such as archaeological excavations, children's playgrounds, and cultural exchange programs between Arab and Israeli youth. Called a builder of bridges between nations, Herbert W. Armstrong continues his efforts for world peace. Listen to Dr. Mohammed Hatem, close personal advisor of President Sadat.
It is a pleasure to me, personally, to receive you, Mr. Armstrong, here, because I know you from a long time, and I know what you are doing for the humanity in all the world. Ambassador Foundation is promoting better understanding between all peoples in all the world. They had about 26 projects in 26 countries in the world.
In recognition of Mr. Armstrong's heartfelt efforts at promoting human understanding, Jerusalem Mayor Teddy Kollek hosted a banquet in his honor.
The ambassadors of Ambassador, the people who are here, are fulfilling a tremendous role for peace in the world. They're here today, they're going to South Africa and to Russia and to China and to many of the countries of Europe, all in the mission of more human understanding. And I want to thank you for your good relationship to us, for your friendship for us, for your efforts that you are making here.
It is in this spirit that Mr. Armstrong begins his current Middle East tour in the changing land of modern-day Egypt. Cairo, a city in a land of contrasts, steeped in tradition, yet longing for progress, tied to the past, but looking to the future. It is ironic that Egypt, the land of the pyramids, physical symbols of permanence, is a land faced with an indefinite future due to the ever-present possibility that war could break out with its Israeli neighbors. Aware of the uneasiness here, of the pervading tension, Herbert W. Armstrong, speaking to some 300 government officials and educators at the Nile Hilton, acknowledged the dangers facing humanity.
I'm not going to speak to you very long tonight, but I'm going to speak plainly, because the time has come for very plain speaking, and I've come a long way to bring you this message. And today we stand, if you pardon my giving you the bad news first, we stand on the very brink of human extinction. Conditions in the world are constantly growing worse, and the weapons now exist of mass destruction that can annihilate all human life from this planet. Now, in all human history, they have never invented a new weapon of mass destruction that has not been used. There is a cause for every effect, and we're in a very bad effect today. And in this world, we've been accustomed to treating with effects and ignoring the causes. And you can never get rid of an effect until you cure the cause. And it's time we learn why. What brought us to this kind of position in the world? Knowledge doubled in the decade of the 60s, but also world's troubles doubled. Troubles that man has been unable to solve or to cure. In the 70s, knowledge doubled again. But again, our troubles doubled. Now, the increased knowledge didn't cause the increased trouble. But on the other hand, the increased knowledge did not solve our troubles. And we still have our troubles. Such things as peace, which we don't have. We work for peace, we fight for peace. Yes, and there are wars constantly going on. There's one in the Middle East right now. But peace and happiness, contentment and joy, and abundant well-being that is universal for all of us, those are spiritual qualities. They're not physical qualities, they're spiritual. And we don't seem to realize that. There is a basic spiritual law, and it is in motion. That law could be stated as the principle of outgoing love toward others. I simplify it by calling it the way of give. Now, that is the way of cooperation instead of competition. It is the way of helping, of serving. I simplify it by calling that the way of give, because people can understand that word so well. But the opposite, the transgression of that way, is the way of get. And that's the way this world is living. This world is living the way of get. I love me, and I don't care about you except what I can get from you or take away from you. So the get way is the way of vanity, trying to exalt ourselves, the way of coveting, of lust and greed, the way of envy and jealousy toward others, the way of competition and strife that leads to violence and war.
Having delivered the message of the root cause of humanity's problems to an audience of leading Egyptians, Mr. Armstrong then departed for Israel to continue his Middle East trip. When the Gulf Stream II touched down, this flight became the first since the Six-Day War to go directly from Cairo to Jerusalem. Jerusalem, the home of virtually all holy sites of the three major faiths, the Muslim Dome of the Rock, the Jewish Western Wall, commonly known as the Wailing Wall, and the Christian Church of the Holy Sepulchre, are all located within Jerusalem's walls. The city was divided prior to the Six-Day War, and Arab passions were inflamed when Israel took control. Since then, there has been Arab talk of a holy war to regain possession of that part of Jerusalem known as the Old City. Therefore, the present peace is an unstable one. Into this center of age-old animosity, Herbert W. Armstrong brought a message of peace. Speaking to a banquet at the King David Hotel that overlooks the west wall of the Old City, Mr. Armstrong again contrasted the two philosophies of life. Mr. Armstrong concluded his Jerusalem visit with a private meeting with Prime Minister Menachem Begin. During their discussion, Prime Minister Begin gave Mr. Armstrong a personal message to carry to President Sadat of Egypt, with whom Mr. Armstrong was to meet 8 days later. The meeting began with a rather frank appraisal of President Sadat's unprecedented approach to peace.
Mr. President, I want to say one thing right straight from the heart. I respect and admire you more than I can tell you, because you have risked everything in an effort for peace. And your heart has to be in it, and it has to be genuine. And not many will do that. I meet heads of state all over the world, but I have not known one that would risk what you did of acquiring the enmity of the Arab world in order to have peace. Now that takes courage. And you had it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
President Sadat's spirit of self-sacrifice, already demonstrated in the peace initiative, is clearly reflected in his response to Mr. Armstrong's message.
There are two philosophies of life. There are only two ways of life. Everything in general will fall into one or the other category, and they go in opposite directions. And the one I term in simple language give, the other is get.
That's right.
Now, give merely means outflowing love.
That's right.
Toward others. But I put in just simple language of give and get. The world is geared to get. Everything is get. It's in business, it's in athletics.
Right.
And
Right.
it's in politics.
Right.
And it's in society.
That's right.
And it's just in every segment of life.
That's right.
Well, I learned this philosophy of give and get. And I tell you what it is, just my way of stating the law of God. And I think the personage I mean by God is the same personage you mean by Allah. Isn't that correct?
Exactly.
And that is his law. And you could express it in the more religious language of love, which is outflowing. But I just take it in the more secular word of give and get. And I think that makes it plain to people in all walks of life, whether they are of whatever religion or of no religion. And it expresses the principle of a way of life. It's just a general attitude of mind,
That's right.
an attitude we have toward one another and toward other people.
It was at this meeting that President Sadat unveiled a bold new undertaking for the cause of world peace, a proposed $70 million World Peace Center to be built at the base of Mount Sinai. Impressed by the significance of such a monument, Mr. Armstrong offered both moral and financial support for the venture. Even with the vision and personal sacrifice manifested by President Sadat and Prime Minister Begin in their efforts to defuse the many centuries of animosity, a great number of problems remain to be solved before real peace in the Middle East can be a reality. The Palestine problem continues to be stalled in the on-again, off-again autonomy talks. The Arab world also demands that East Jerusalem be returned to Arab sovereignty. The Jewish reply, never. What about the continuing brushfire wars among the Arab nations themselves, such as the Iraq-Iran conflict? Could they not erupt into a major conflagration? And now, the superpowers of Russia and the United States are looking over their shoulders as Europe makes overtures to the Middle East. Is the situation about to be more strongly complicated by a third power play? Quite possibly. Europe obtains about 80% of her oil from the Middle East. 80%. Will she stand idly by if, for some reason, the lifeblood of her economy is about to be cut off? What about Russia? Will she cool her heels in Afghanistan while European influence in the Sinai continues to develop? Will the peoples of this troubled part of the world finally live at peace with one another? Or will their centuries-old animosity ultimately engulf the rest of the world in the flames of war? Geographically, politically, and theologically, the Middle East will continue as a focal point of world events. Indeed, world peace hinges on a tranquil Middle East. Unless the world learns the lessons of the past, we face the most cataclysmic events of history. But if it doesn't, will humanity survive? The answer is in the message proclaimed by Herbert W Armstrong, Ambassador for World Peace.
Every trouble, every bit of woe and unhappiness and suffering in this world has come from living the way of get. Now, we're not going to have a better world until we get off of that way of get and get on to the way of give. We're not going to do that ourselves. Human nature is a little too strong. It isn't going to let us. It's going to have to be done to us. And then that all-powerful, unseen, strong hand from someplace is going to intervene in this world's affairs and is going to save humanity from itself.
Okay, thanks to God for preserving those videos and Mr. Armstrong speaking. I have my voice back for just a little bit, enough to thank Roland for putting a comment at the bottom that shows the scripture that answers the fellow's questions. I'm going to leave it up for a moment, and you can see this is the scripture where it shows that Jesus Christ made a small cord. Well, first of all, he found those in the temple selling oxen and sheep and doves and the changers of money sitting. And when he had made a scourge of small cords, you know, that's where you make a whip, he drove them all out, and the sheep and the oxen, and poured out the changers' money and overthrew the tables. And Roland Farfan, thank you very much for finding and posting that scripture to help us out. All right, brethren, that's it for today. Thank you for joining us, and we'll do our regular sign out, and with a reminder that I will definitely very much appreciate your prayers for this condition affecting my throat. We signed off with that one before. Shall I sign off with our usual marching into the kingdom?